Meseches Kesubos Daf Vez begins the fourth part of the Masechta. It actually begins the last few lines in Daf Mem Aleph. That's where we begin. The fourth part continues the discussion about a Nara that was the victim of Ones or Pitoi. It begins with a mission that it discusses at what stage does the father get the payments, at what stage does the girl herself get the payments. The Gemara will return the conversation to that of Knas and somebody who's Mod to be Knas. When does somebody who is Mod have to, if he swore falsely first and then he was Mod, when does he have to bring a carbon for swearing falsely, and when does he have to pay the extra fine for swearing falsely? I have Machlokes Tanaim and a Machlokes Amoraim within more or less Machlokes Tanaim, which we will try to prove from our Mishnah. So let's begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah begins by listing the payments for a Nara that is the victim of Ones or Mefate. It says that a Mispate gets paid for Knas, Voshes, and Pegam, and Ones gets Tsar as well. The Gemara asks what's the Chiddush is. We've seen it already. The Gemara says maybe the Chiddush is the next line, that it goes to the father. The Gemara says that's not a Chiddush either. A Mefuta wouldn't get anything if it went to her because she was Mochlid when she agreed. So it's got to be that it goes to the father. The fact that we're discussing Mefuta, the Gemara says the Chiddush is the next part, and that is, at what stage is it considered to be belonging to the father? It's his, and he owns this value, and he can even inherit it. He can bequeath it to his inheritors. At what stage do we say that if the father loses out at this point, if he exits the scene, it goes to the girl herself? So let's first discuss the stages, and then we'll see what the machlokes is. So the stage of the procedure of the legal proceedings of an onus or mefata are as follows. Stage one is from after the attack until what's called hamada bedin, when they actually stand in court. Stage two is from when they stand in court and it's decided that the money is owed until it's actually collected. Now, the father would lose rishus over her if one of two things happen. Either he dies or she becomes a bogeres. She passes age 12 and a half. So according to the Chachamim, the Mishnah says, if either of those two things happen in stage one, that is before Hamada Bedin, then she gets her own knas. The father no longer has rights to it, and she gets it herself. Either she becomes a bogeres or he dies. If, however, it's in stage two, that is, they already passed Hamada Bedin, just hasn't been collected yet, now she becomes a bogeres, and now the father dies. It's considered to be the father's property already, and the inheritors, the father's inheritors, that would be his brothers or his sons, whatever it is, they get the money from then on. It doesn't belong to the girl once Hamada Bedin has happened. Reb Shimon disagrees. Reb Shimon says even in stage two, if the father disappears during stage two, either because she becomes a bogeres or because he dies, it goes to the girl. It's not considered to be the father's money yet, and therefore it's awarded to the girl herself. Only once it's collected, now it's the father's money, and now if she becomes a bogeres or he dies, or the two things happen, it goes to the father or to the inheritors. He already has control of it. Now, the Gemara, as we discusses what the Chiddush is, and now the Gemara brings in another machlokes between the Rabbanan and Reb Shimon. We've seen one, now the Gemara brings another one. Machlokes is as follows. What happens if a man accuses someone else of onus or mefata of his daughter, and he denies it? He says it's not true. The other one says, I make you swear. He says amen, which means that he swears. Okay, so he swore that he didn't do onus or pito, and he doesn't owe the payments for it. So the Gemara says, and then he goes in and he admits it. And he admits that he swore falsely. So generally the rule is that if you swear falsely to a monetary obligation, you have to bring, first of all, a carbon for swearing falsely, a carbon asham gezelos. And second of all, you have to pay extra. You have to pay kofer, which is an extra fifth for swearing falsely. You have to pay chomish, an extra fifth for swearing falsely. So what happens here? So the Chachamim say he swore falsely, and therefore he needs to pay for it. Rav Shimon says, no, he doesn't have to pay anything because he swore falsely, but then he admitted it. There was never any evidence brought against him. So there was never an obligation for him to pay knas. You don't pay knas if you admit it on your own. So this person never had an obligation. There was never any monetary obligation. He swore, but he admitted it. That admitting it still doesn't create a monetary obligation. So he doesn't have to pay any extra. And he also doesn't bring a carbon for swearing falsely because there is no establishment of a false shvur here. Even though he admitted himself, the admitting doesn't count as far as knas is concerned. The Gemara says that the Chachamim agree to that as far as Knas goes. They just say for Botus and Pegam, which is not Knas. There you do pay even if you admit it. That he swore falsely on, and he has to bring a carbon for swearing falsely to that. The Gemara later will address what Reb Shimon, why he doesn't hold that way. Now, the Gemara brings now a machlokes between Abaye and Rabba. The Gemara says, Abaye asked Rabba, what happens if a person accuses someone else of onus or pitoy of his daughter, but he goes further. He says that we actually went to court already, and you were tried in court, you were found guilty, and you were determined you have to pay it. You just didn't pay it yet. Now I'm just coming to collect the money. And the other guy denies the whole story. Well, I didn't do onus, I didn't do pitoy, we didn't go to court, they didn't try anything against me, there's nothing to talk about. He denies the whole thing. And then he swears, and then he admits it. So now, listen to what happens here. First, it's the same as the case we had in Machlokes Rav Shimon and the Chachamim, except that now the claim was that you actually were made to pay it, you were found guilty. And that turned out to be true. So now, does Rav Shimon still say that this is Knas? And Knas, you don't pay, you don't bring a carbon shvua for swearing falsely if you were found to have sworn falsely, and here there's nothing to talk about because it's just Knas, you were never really obligated? Or do we say here, since they did go to court, and the court did rule, he was just denying that they went to court. Once they went to court, it's not Knas anymore. It's not subject to the rules of Knas. Now the court created a monetary obligation. Once the court found him guilty and paskin that he has to pay, now it's a monetary obligation. You can't get out of it by admitting. So now he swears that monetary obligation never existed. Great. So he swore falsely. Now he has to, he now admitted that he swore falsely. Now he's admitting to mamo, not to knas. He's admitting to a financial payment that was created by the court. Does he have to swear? Does he have to bring a carbon shvua and pay chomesh for that? So again, the question is: once the court paskins that a knas is owed, does that turn it now into money, or is it still called knas at its root? This was a question that Abaye asked to Rabbah, and Rabbah responded. The Gemara says that he answered. He said, yes, it's money, and now he has to bring the carbon for swearing falsely. Now the Gemara kind of a number of kashas on this, some based off our Mishnah. Our first proof is from a brisa that explains the machlokes of Shimon and the Chachamim as to whether or not somebody has to swear, someone has to bring a carbon for swearing falsely to knas that he admits to. So the Gemara's proof is going to be from Reb Shimon's half of the brisa, which is the second half of the brisa. Again, remember the whole question between Abaye and Rabbah was only in Reb Shimon's opinion. So Rabbi Shimon says as follows. He gives a source of his halacha that if somebody swears falsely to knas, he doesn't have to pay if he admits later. And he lists a number of knasos, and he says that you don't have to pay for them. The list is as follows. Somebody who's accused of ones, pitoy, for his axe killing an eved, he has to pay 30 shekel, that's a knas, or for knocking out the tooth or eye of his eved, where they go free, that's also a type of knas. In all these cases, if he denies it, swears, and then admits, he does not have to bring a carbon shuas falsely. And the reason is because the pasuk describing the obligation to bring a carbon for swearing falsely on all these things, those are all money. Those are all not knas. And the brisa lists it. It says v'chichesh b'amisa b'pikadon o b'sisumes yod o b'gazel o ashak esamisei Ematza Veda, V'chichesh ba v'nishba sheker. Nachazakal asher yasa adam lachte bahena. So here you have on the list, you have Me'ila, you have Pikadon, where you were given to watch something and you stole it, or other types of stealing and oppression, or finding a lost object and refusing to return it. All these cases are not knas, they're money. And all these, it lists the swearing falsely and the carbon asham gezelos. So all these are money. So Rav Shimon says, this is my source, that you only have to bring a carbon for swearing falsely to deny a claim of money, not to deny a claim of knas. Now, the Gemara's proof is from this. The Gemara says this must be talking about Hamada Bedin, where it's already in stage 2. It's already after they determine that the money is owed, and the Beis Din rule that it has to be paid, and therefore, according to Rabbah, it should be turned into money now, not knas. And still, Rav Shimon is saying that you don't have to bring the korban shvuah. So the Gemara says, how do you know that it's talking about after Hamad B'din? Maybe it's talking about when it was still a Knas. So the Gemara says the reason is because if you look at the Rabbanon's half of the Mishnah of this Brisa, which is the first half of the Brisa, the Rabbanon give their source that you do have to bring a korban for swearing falsely to Knas. And they learn it from the pasuk that says, Uma'ala ma'al b'Hashem. That's a double language of Uma'ala ma'al. That's to include even a situation where it's knas, but the knasses that are listed in this brisa are as follows. It lists kefel, which is you pay twice for swearing falsely, and arba v'chamish, you pay 4 or 5 times for stealing a sheep or ox and selling or slaughtering it. Now, that can only be that you pay twice is only if the court came and already paskin that you stole something. If you didn't have a psak that you stole something, there can't be a payment that you owe twice. There is nothing to owe once that you could say you owe twice and then deny that you owe it afterwards. So it's got to be talking about where you already went to court, they passing that you stole, you were supposed to pay it back double, and then you deny that that ever happened and that you ever owed it. So that has to be what it's referring to. So the Rabbanon and the Reisha definitely have to be referring to when it's after the court's psak. Therefore, the Sefer is probably talking about after the court's psak, and therefore we have a good proof from here that Reb Shimon holds even after the court's psak, it's still knas. So Gemara says, the Rabbi said, I can answer you that the entire thing is Reb Shimon, and the beginning is not really the Chachamim at all. It doesn't quote anybody. And one is referring to before Hamad B'din, was referred to after Hamad B'din, and he's saying when it's already paskin, when it's already paskin its money, that's what he says in the Reisha, and when it hasn't been paskin yet, it's knas, and if you don't know it, that's what he says in the Sefer. Says Rabbi, I'm not going to give you that answer because it's a weak answer, it's a bit forced, because it says these are the words of Reb Shimon in the middle, and referring to the Sefer. It should have either introduced the entire Brisa with Reb Shimon says, or concluded the entire Brisa with these are the words of Reb Shimon, if the whole thing was really Reb Shimon. So he says, therefore, I'm going to give you a different answer. The beginning is really the Rabbanon, and the Sefer is really Rabbi Shimon. And you're right, it does clearly say that once the court rules, it's considered to be money, and you do have to bring a korban shvuah, even according to Rabbi Shimon. It says so clearly in the Sefer. The thing is, I wasn't talking about kabbanas. I was just talking about whether it's considered to be money so that it's owed to the person, so that if he dies, his inheritors can collect it. The rule is your inheritors can collect money that's owed to their father, but they cannot collect knas that's owed to the father. So I was just saying that once the court rules, then it's considered to be money that's owed and not knas that's owned. It's considered to be a restitution, and therefore they could collect it. And this Brisa wasn't talking about that at all, so you have no proof on that subject altogether. Says the Gemara, okay, now I have another kasha on Rabbah, and that's from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah quotes Rabbi Shimon, who clearly says that the only time that the father of the girl who was a victim of onus, the only time he could collect it is if it was, the only time he could collect it, and that's that he owns it, and he can therefore bequeath it to his sons, is if he collected the money already. If it's after Hamad B'din, stage 2, what we call it, after Hamad B'din, but before it was collected, and he dies then, the children won't inherit that. So why not? According to what Rabbi is saying now, that once the Hamad B'din happens, it's already considered to be money, it's considered to be a financial obligation, not a knas, so then let the children of the father inherit it. It's already been determined. How come the Mishnah says that the children of the father don't get it, and no one gets it from the father's camp, and therefore it goes to the girl herself? Doesn't make sense. So obviously it's not true. Obviously it's still considered knas even after the court rules that it is owed, and that's why the father cannot bequeath it to his sons, and instead it goes back to the daughter because the father is out of the picture here altogether. So Gemara answers, you're right, that is correct in this case, but this is an exception, and that's because the pasuk describing the chi of knas here says, "V'nasan ha'isha shoychev imala avi hanara chamishim kesef. It says v'nasan, and the word v'nasan means that he should give it. That means that the father only gets ownership over it once it's given. Gezeres hakasef, that here the rules are different. Generally, once the court rules, the halacha is it's already considered to be the father's money and he can bequeath it. Here it's until he actually takes control, till he actually gets it in his hand, that is considered to be his because of this gezeres hakasef, of the fact that it says v'nasan. All other kanasos, though, wouldn't be like that. It would be like Rabbah said, from the time that the court rules, it's already considered his, and he can bequeath it to his sons afterwards. So the Gemara asks, you're saying that it's based on the word v'nosan, but discussing the 30 shekel fine for killing an eved, it says yitain ladonav, also has the word, and you should give it. You should say the same halacha there. But it says no, it's only v'nosan. Yitain and v'nosan are not the same. They both mean to give, but it's a different conjugation, and it's only about v'nosan that you say that, not about yitain. Asks the Gemara, if this is true, so then back in the Brisa, when Reb Shimon was explaining his opinion that there is no shavua, and he said because you learned from the pasuk of V'chichesh, which has the list of where you have shavua, and those are all mammon, and this is knas. So what are you saying from that pasuk for? That's not the reason. The reason is because it says v'nasan, and v'nasan says that it's not considered to be Mammon is not considered to be belonging to the father until it's actually paid. Special halacha here. So you don't need v'chichesh for that. It's nothing to do with that. It's because the Torah says v'nosan. So my answer is no, there is a case that you need v'chichesh, and that's where the daughter became a bogeres from Shas Hamad B'Din. After Hamad B'Din, before was a collector, she became a bogeres. Therefore, the father loses his rights according to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon holds that he has to actually collect it before she becomes a bogeres to still own it. The daughter then owns it. And then she dies, so the father would then inherit it. Now it's total money. Now it's not a knas at all. He inherited it from his daughter. He didn't collect it as knas. Still, it's denied here. You would still have to bring a carbon shvua. How do you know that? That can't be because of v'nasan. So it's got to be, because there's nothing to do here with being a given or not given. So it's got to be because there's knas involved. And therefore, we have to bring the pasuk of v'chichesh to say that it's because of knas. At its root, it's knas. The Gemara explains that you would have that halacha. So the Gemara, our last proof, and that is from where Reb Shimon is explaining his opinion, and he says that the reason that you don't have to pay is because it was a knas. And the reason you don't have to swear, the reason why you don't have to bring a carbon for swearing falsely is because it was a knas, and therefore he wouldn't pay the knas at all on his own. So obviously that's talking about where there was no psak in court, because if there would be a psak in court, you can't say he wouldn't pay it if he hadn't admitted. The psak is already there. He's already obligated to pay. So Gemara says no. He would have said his halacha even in a case where there was a psak in court. He would still say that you don't have to pay because it's exeris hakasov, that you don't have to pay for something that is a knas at its root, and you don't have to bring a carbon if you swear falsely for it. He was just saying l'divrayim dechachamim. I would say even if there was no hamad b'din, you should at least admit if there was hamad b'din that you should be required. You should not be required, that is, to bring the carbon for swearing falsely, because it was knas and there's no hamad b'din. Now, the Rabbanon disagreed because they say that the person denied and swore falsely about the bushes and pagam, and Rabbi Shimon was saying that it's only about knas. So we didn't explain earlier what the reason is. Gemara here explains what they're arguing over. Rabbi Shimon says he certainly had knas in mind because that's a fixed amount. Bushes pagam doesn't know how much that's going to be, so that's not what his main claim was. Chachamim say no. His main claim was the thing that he knows he could get, even if the guy admits. Knas is not his main claim because if he could just admit it and he would lose it. So therefore, his main claim was bushes pagam.